Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time visiting the channel, I thank you and I recommend maybe you go back and look at part 1 and part 2 of the Mustang II suspension install in this Falcon. This is going to be the third and final episode. I should finish up everything today, and I'm going to start by getting these brake rotors installed. These brake rotors are basically a stock style Mustang II rotor. They have an 11-inch diameter. But I did opt for the drilled and slotted rotors, which you can see here. Pretty nice. They have a nice zinc coating on them, and they'll resist rust for a little while at least. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, guys. So as you can see here, I put grease all over the spindle. I might have overdone it, but I'll wipe off the excess. One thing that I've already done, and I've already packed the wheel bearings in grease. There's no point showing that. I mean, it's pretty basic. And I put the wheel bearing in the inside of the rotor here, and then I put the grease seal in already. So I'm basically ready right now to go ahead and get this thing installed. I'm going to do that right now. Be careful to get it lined up straight, rotate it back and forth so you don't hurt that grease seal on the back side. I'm just going to drop the outer bearing in, press it in by hand, and follow it up with this washer. The special washer has a little tab on it that locks into the keyway on the spindle. Followed up with this thin nut. This nut is not a castellated nut. Some of the kits might be castellated. I have a castellated retainer that's going to come behind this nut, which is right here. But before that goes on, I'm going to go ahead and get this nut torqued. So if you look online, you'll find a couple different answers for what to torque this thing to, but 20 foot-pounds is about what you need to torque it to initially. And then after the bearings are seated, you're going to want to back it off and then tighten it to about 10 to 15 inch-pounds. Now, inch-pounds is not much. That's about 1 foot-pound. All right, that's 20 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to roll it back and forth, both directions. Just make sure it's nice. The bearings are all the way seated. Back it off. And then, 1 foot-pound is basically finger tight. And that's pretty loose. I mean, most people just do this by feel. It's more of an art, really. Got a little bit of a mess here. Grease going everywhere. That's okay. You can get it wiped off. So now it needs torque to 1 foot-pound, which I mean is basically finger tight. I don't have a torque wrench that actually goes down that low, so I'm going to take the weight of my torque wrench. Basically just do that. Just spin it while I leave the torque wrench just hanging on it. Give it a feel. You don't want any slop, but you want it to kind of drag but still spin. I'm going to call that good. Throw this castellated nut on, or it's actually not a nut, it's a retainer. And the retainer has a bunch of different grooves. You just keep turning it around until one of the grooves lines up with the hole in the spindle. Like that one. Cotter pin in. All right, so last thing is to get the dust cap installed. A lot of people probably don't put any sealant on this, but if you don't, the grease will start to kind of dribble out when it gets hot. So I'm going to go ahead, run the little RTV, and I'll be right back. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit with brake cleaner so the RTV sticks. All right, so I got this thing all cleaned up. I'm just putting a little bit of RTV around the outside here. I also have a sleeve from a ball joint press set that fits right over this nicely, so you don't have to smash the end of the dust cap when you try to install it. Good if you could just find some piece of pipe or something so you're not banging the dust cap in. All right, that's done. You know, obviously I need to get my calipers installed, but I'm going to hold off on getting the calipers installed because they're just going to be in my way. I'm going to go ahead and get this done to the other side of the car. There's no point in showing you that. And then after that, I'm going to get started on installing the coil springs. All right, so I got my coil spring compressor here on the bench. I've already got the compressor on the spring and I started cranking it down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and crank it down a little bit more though. Compressing springs always terrifies me. Got a massive amount of energy bound up in the spring. You know, you got your hands right around it here trying to hold it. I don't really know of any other way, a better way to do it. It's just kind of a lot of work, but you can see here I got it in there. I could compress it a little farther, but there's really no point in going farther than I need to if it fits. So I'm going to go see if it fits. All right, so it looks like it's going to be tight. I got to wiggle it around just right to get it in here. All right, so I had some trouble getting it to fit. The length of the threaded rod on the compressor, spring compressor, is getting in my way. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen these top bolts on the upper control arm here. Slide it all the way out to the end of the slots on the top mount here. I think it'll give me some more room. Boy, this is kind of difficult here. Oh, there it goes. Found the magic angle here. Get it in. Just like that. All right, I got the top in. The bottom is kind of where it needs to be, so I'm going to have to start undoing the spring compressor here. As the spring gets uncompressed, I'll have to guide the bottom in, make sure it's all seated in the right spot. I'll show you kind of where the little spring nests in at the bottom. All right, so this is the spot I'm talking about right here. Right here, the spring, the end of the curl of the spring right here, it's got a seat down on this side. There's a little curved like ramp, and it's bent up right here. You got to make sure you seat it right down in here. The spring is basically sitting on its own. I have the spring compressor just loose, but of course, when the weight of the vehicle comes up on this spring will make full contact right in here. And so I got the spring compressor loose, but it is a bit of a trick to get it out of here. You got to thread the rod all the way out the bottom. Of course, it's fine thread, so it takes a long time. Bottom part, the little shoe part of the spring compressor can slide out. Still threading it out. All right, got the bottom piece, threaded part of the spring compressor out. There's not enough space between these coils to actually get the jaws of the compressor out. So I'm gonna have to fiddle back and forth to take one of the jaws and get them to go out the side of the spring here like this. All right, guys, I've been fiddling with the jaws of this pulley for it for like 15 minutes now. But I think I finally got it. It's quite a trick. Some springs might be a little bit larger and the jaws would just get out easier. You gotta stuff it through, twist it just right, and get the jaws disconnected. What a hassle. Another reason it could be a little bit more difficult is that there's not a lot of space between the coils of this spring. I have a feeling that these springs are probably going to need cut down, but there's really no way of knowing until the full weight of the vehicle is resting on the suspension. All right, now that I got the spring installed, I'm going to go ahead and loosen these nuts on the top adjuster here on the top control arm. Slide everything back in if I can. Nope. I'm going to have to get the weight of the vehicle on it. All right, I got a jack under the suspension here, and I was able to get the top adjuster to slide over. Go ahead and snug these nuts up. One thing I should note is these nuts that I have right here, these are not the lock nuts that came with it. If you know you're going to be fitting up suspension over and over again, that's just to swap the nuts out with regular nuts. You're not having to, run your lock nuts back and forth. All right, got the spring installed, jacks out from under everything, and go ahead and get the spring installed on the other side. All right, so I've got the coil springs installed. So next up is to get the shock absorbers in there. Now, I have some issues though with the shock absorbers that came in the kit. So this is the one that came in the kit. It's not necessarily a bad shock. It's made by Monroe, so it's a name brand. But there's a couple of different issues though. It's too long for one, and also there's no bump stop on the rod right here. So Mustang II suspensions, they do not have external bump stops. Nowhere on the suspension or on the factory 70 suspension was there an external bump stop. The shock absorber itself is supposed to be the bump stop, both for when your suspension cycled all the way up and when it cycles all the way down. Now, of course, when you cycle all the way down, it's not as big of an issue. I mean, the only time you really ever cycle your suspension all the way down is when you jack it up or if you're jumping your car in the air. But if you do not have a bump stop coming up, something else is going to hit. And what's going to hit is your ball joints. So when you cycle the suspension all the way up and down to its extremes, the stud of your ball joint is going to start binding against the casing of the ball joint itself, which can lead to the ball joint actually snapping off. That is not good. So I'm going to go ahead, install this shock absorber, and show you how much is sticking out the bottom to show you exactly how much too long this shock really is. All right, take the top off the shock, get it up under here. I have to compress the shock to get it started unless you have your car jacked up farther. All right, so I have the top of the shock snug right now. As you can see right here, got a lot of extra space hanging down right here. As you can see right here, these shocks are way too long. Suspension is cycled all the way down right now. I mean, everything is bound up against the actual ball joints, which, it's not the end of the world when you jack a vehicle up, but it's still way, way far off from where it needs to be. Also, another thing that you'll notice is right in here, these springs, they're like just about rubbing up here. This will not be the case when the vehicle is under its own weight. But also when I get the correct length shock in here, the suspension isn't going to travel down quite so far. And as soon as this upper control arm starts pivoting upwards, it starts going outwards as well, and you get a lot of space in here. All right, guys, so these are the shock absorbers that came with my kit. They don't work. They're too long. They don't have bump stops on the rod. This shock right here, this is a typical Mustang II shock that you would find on like an original 70s Mustang. There's a lot of aftermarket kits out there that have like extended suspension travel and stuff like that. That's most likely what this shock is for. But this is the shock that I need. It has a bump stop right here on the rod. It's, well, let me put them side by side. It's about 2 inches shorter. This is the shock I need, but there is one issue. So this is the typical bottom mount on a Mustang II shock. It's a cross tube, uses a 7/16 bolt. This is the bottom mount that my control arms were designed for. This is called a crossbar. So I have a solution for that though. I'm basically going to have to take a crossbar, press this bushing out, and replace it with a crossbar. Ended up finding this crossbar has a 5/8 OD, correct spacing on the bolt holes. So I went ahead and I pressed this out on my other shock absorber, and I pressed in the crossbar, and it worked out. So nice and snug, everything's in there. So this is the shock absorber that I'm going to be using. But it just dawned on me though that I'm not going to install the shock absorbers right now, because most likely once I get the weight of the engine and hood and the whole weight of the vehicle on the car, I'm going to see what the ride height is, and most likely I'm going to have to cut my springs down. So unfortunately, probably going to have to take these springs out again, but there's really no way to dial in your ride height with coil springs like this until you get all the weight on the vehicle. All right guys, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on the panel for these inner fenders. Got a piece of cardboard here that I cut a little notch in it just so it initially clears the lower control arm, and then when I get it all clamped in place, I'll measure up from the control arm to figure out exactly how much clearance I need for the control arm to cycle. So I'm just going to take some of my magnets here and try to hold this cardboard in place. I already cut it to a width that I think will work between here, and so I'm going to center this notch between the tubes of the lower control arm. I don't know, these magnets don't hold that great for how thick this cardboard is, but I think they'll keep it, and I'll just have to be careful not to push it around. All right, so I got it pretty well centered. So between here and over here. So I think I'm just gonna put a few more magnets on it here, and then just kind of hold my hand against it and start tracing from the back side. All right, so here's a better view. You can see I've got it nice and centered between the lower control arm here, and then up through here. I'm just going to trace around the edge, and once I get the whole piece cut out, I'm probably going to bring it back in here, and then I'll start marking out the holes that are already here. Of course, I'm going to use the existing holes and then add some holes. So I'll try to gently trace around here so I don't get loose. All right, so I'm gonna start right here, and I'm gonna draw a line all the way across, parallel with the tops of the control arms, because the control arms actually sit at kind of an angle, they angle backwards. And that's gonna be the top edge of my notch. All right, so I decided to take this angle point right here, then draw a line all the way across that is actually parallel to the tops of the control arm right here. Because the control arms actually sit at a backwards angle like this. And that should give me the clearance that I need. Of course, I'll radius the corners right in here. And yeah, eventually I might add like a neoprene rubber piece in here. I don't know, I'll figure that out later. All right, there it is. So this is the inside profile. I'm going to need to add material all around the edge for my bolt pattern. I'm thinking about 1 inch all the way around. And then I'll, of course, add my corner radiuses right in here. And I'll get it all trimmed out, and then I'll flip it around and see how it fits on the other side. All right, so I'm just going around marking lines 1 inch offset from the inside line that I traced. Then I'll connect all the little dots. All right, let's see here. I'm not sure what radius I want to end up with, but I might just go grab a couple items just to kind of see what type of radius looks good. All right, I got a couple sockets here. Let's see what radius looks like I got. Pretty close. This measures 2 inch diameter, so I need something that is 4 inches in diameter. All right, roll of tape. This will work. All right, so I got this thing all traced out. Just gonna go ahead and cut along this outside edge and along this edge right here, and go see how it fits up on the car. All right, here's my piece. Got it all cut out, and I think it looks pretty good. So let's go see how it fits on the car. Let's see, which way does it go? Yeah, something like that. All right, so I'm back on the other side of the car now, and so I'll flip it around, see, if it's really a mirror image, see how close it is. Put it into the back side, and I'll be able to see the line that I drew, see how it lines up. It is pretty close. Definitely not like a perfect mirror image of the other side. All right, so looking at it further, there's a spot I realized right here that is a bit of an issue. So everything lines up pretty well as far as around this outside profile, front and back. The distance between the lower control arm and my cutout right here, is honestly about a ½ inch shifted from the other side. I think I'm gonna have to shift this cutout between the driver's side and the passenger side. This template is for the passenger side, so the driver's side I'm gonna have to shift this cutout towards the back. About a ½ inch. All right, guys, so I previously told you that I had about a ½ inch difference between the driver's side and the passenger side when it comes to the location of this cutout right here. I looked at it a little bit closer, and it turns out it's more like 5/16, so not such an extreme difference. So I decided to make a revision to the location of this and shift it about 5/32 of an inch to basically split the difference, so that I can use one template for both the passenger and the driver's side. So I went ahead and did that, and I transferred this profile and made the changes to a piece of heavy cardstock right here. So this will be my final template that I'll use, and then I'll save this template. I try to save templates of any custom pieces of sheet metal that I make like this. Not patch panels that welded in, but like pieces that bolt on I might want to make again someday, or somebody else might want to make. So I'm going to go ahead and start laying this out on a piece of metal. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about what I'm going to make it out of. Ideally, I would make this out of 18 gauge, and then I'd add some bead rolls to match the bead rolls that you see here on the inner fender. These are about a 1-inch wide flat bead roll, and I'd love for these inner fender panels to match. But I do not have a bead roller, so someday I hope to get one, but for now I'm just going to have to make these out of just a flat piece of metal. If I were adding bead rolls, I'd make them probably out of 18 gauge. That's something that most bead rollers can handle. And then the bead rolls stiffen it up. But because it's a flat panel, I'm going to use 14 gauge, which is pretty stiff. So hopefully it'll won't oil can on me, and it'll add quite a bit of structure back into these inner fenders. All right, this piece of 14 gauge that I have was actually painted white at some point. I don't really remember what it came from, but it's just a piece of metal that got painted and started cutting pieces out of it. So I'm going to use a pencil actually, because I think it's going to show up pretty well on the painted surface. All right, so I got everything drawn out here. I got both pieces laid out side by side. Same piece of metal. Should just be able to make a single cut right through here. Kind of smudged it. And got both pieces out along that edge, save some cutting. All right, panels are all cut out. Let's go ahead and see how these things fit. All right, I think the panel fits pretty good. Right down here in the bottoms, there's a couple spots right where the little narrow part right here comes down that needs to be kind of bent over to match the profile of the inner fender. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those kind of formed to match the inner fender a little bit. And then I'll make some marks on the inside so that I can line it up. All right, so you can see here, I got some lines drawn kind of around the perimeter right here, just some reference lines. You can line it up from the kind of the wheel side. And I got some little bins right down here on the bottom added. I'm gonna go ahead and fit these up. Some clamps here, I'll just clamp it in place. Then trace the top holes and go from there. The lines line up pretty well here on the inside. I just kind of split the difference all the way around and made it work. So I'm going to come back up here to the top. Let's see, on this side we'll start right here. And we'll just start tracing these holes all the way around. I will add a hole right here, but there's not a hole right here. Come all the way around. So I guess there's just 4 existing holes at the top. And then I'll add holes, all around the perimeter. All right, so I've been working on these inner fender panels. I haven't drilled the holes yet. I was getting ready to do that, and then I was thinking about how I really wanted to put some bead rolls in here. And of course, I already said I didn't have a bead roller. And so I made these out of 14 gauge, which is pretty heavy. And then I got to thinking, could I make a die to basically stamp these bead rolls in with my shop press? And so that's exactly what I did. And I'll show you them in a little bit, but this is the scrap that I was experimenting with. You can see right here, pretty cool looking bead roll. That's the top side, and this would be the bottom side. So I'll show you what it looks like up against the Falcon here. All right, so here's a view showing my test piece right here, the bead, what I'm calling a bead roll. I mean, really it's not a roll, it's a stamping with my shop press, and here's the factory stampings over here. So pretty excited about that. I have one of my inner fender panels set up right now on the press, and so I'm going to go over there, show you how I press the first one. All right, so I got one of my fender panels here set up in the press. I'll show you the top and bottom die up closer when I get this one done. It takes a long time to get everything lined up. Everything is free floating, and so I'm using straight edge and tape measure to get everything lined up. But I got it positioned right now, so I'm going to go ahead and press it. I think the top die might bow a little bit. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and shift it to each end and make sure it's squished tight. Once I initially press it, it doesn't want to like lose its center because it's centered in the die right now. Oh yeah, I could tell it squished this end more. There it is. That looks cool, but I've got ripples here. I've got it drawn out here, so I've got one right here. And then I'm planning on doing another right here. And then over here. I'm going to finish stamping all three, and then I'm going to look at trying to flatten this panel out. Hopefully it turns out, otherwise I'm going to have to make another one of these. It takes a long time to get this centered, so I'm going to go ahead, finish the other two stampings, and then I'll show you how it turned out. All right, so I finished stamping everything. I think it looks pretty cool. Look at that. Nice stamping. This side's a little harder to see. You got some scratches and paint, but pretty cool. There's some little waves here, right through here, and then right through here. I'm going to try to flatten these out with the dead blow. I might not be able to get them perfectly flat unless I take just a little bit of heat to it, kind of relax the metal. But I'll definitely get them flat eventually. So, but I'm going to go ahead and try to flatten it out right now. All right, so that's pretty good. It's a lot straighter. I'll probably mess with these a little bit more when I do some of the finish work, but it's pretty good. I'll take a dolly and a body hammer to them and get them just perfect, but overall I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So, well, I don't have the holes drilled in it yet, but let's go see how it fits up on the car. All right, here we go. That is pretty cool. It's got a little bit of a taco to it, but that doesn't matter. It'll bolt right down. I'll smooth it out a little bit more. Matches the stampings right here. Pretty happy with that. All right, guys, so I got my dies here. This will be the bottom die. You can see it's just a big, heavy chunk of plate. And then got my top die here. This was a big, heavy chunk of actually like flat bar. The bottom die is 1.5 inches thick. Top one's 1 3/4 inches. So it's pretty stout. It takes quite a bit of force to press 14 gauge material without, the bottom or the top die bending, especially the top die. The bottom die is supported pretty much everywhere, but the top die I was just pushing, straight in the middle. So overall, I am super excited about this. Can't wait to get the other side done. It'll take a little while, so I won't show it. Basically the same as this. When I get them both done, then I'll poke these holes in the perimeter and get these things bolted down. All right, so I just fit this up with the car, and these holes right here are a little bit off, and I was kind of worried about that because when I stamped the metal, pieces of this panel have to shrink and some have to stretch. And so basically when you stamp all these stampings, everything kind of shrinks towards the inside. And so these bolt holes right here kind of went inwards. And so I'll have to do a little bit of die grinding both sides, but I should get it. On the next panel, which is right here, I'll probably go ahead, stamp the panel, and then I'll just compensate and move these holes outward slightly. And I shouldn't have that issue. All right, so I went ahead and I got the other panel stamped out, and I have both of them bolted on with the 4 bolt holes that are existing. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to match drill the rest of the holes on both sides and then get these things bolted down. All right, I got both sides bolted on, and I am super happy with the way that it turned out. The stamping is just more than I thought I was going to be able to do to these, so it's a really nice look. I'm just really excited with the way it looks. All right, guys, so I got those inner fender block-off plates done. Really excited with the way they turned out. Really happy there. There's not a lot of things left to finish up this Mustang II install. I got to get the coil springs trimmed to length, but in order to do that, I'm going to have to get the engine, the transmission, the hood, basically this car back to its curb weight so I can get the car sitting on its suspension and then get the ride height set. And of course, the way you get the ride height set with this kit is to trim the coil springs to the exact right height. So actually going to take kind of a little intermission from this video and then get the engine, the transmission installed, and I'll be showing that on another series, so go ahead and check that out on my channel. You might want to subscribe so don't miss that. And then I'll cut back to finishing out this Mustang II install. All right, guys, I got the engine and the transmission, the hood, and everything else reinstalled in the car. So it's at its normal curb weight now, so I can check the suspension ride height. So put some wheels on. It's still sitting on the jack right now, so I'm going to go ahead and let the jack down and see what it looks like. Let's take a look. Here goes. Wow, look at that. Let me give it a little bit of a bounce here. Make sure the suspension's settled down. Wow, I did not expect that. The suspension is almost perfect right there where it is. You want the bottom control arm to be horizontal or, level with the ground. And it is just a little bit, sitting just a little bit high, but these springs typically settle over time by, as much as maybe a 1/4 inch, which would be almost perfect. I'm not even going to measure it. I'm just going to leave it right where it is. All right, guys, the ride height looks really good, so I'm not going to have to trim the springs. So next up is the shock absorbers, which I've already showed you. So I'm going to go ahead and get these things installed. All right, so this would be easier with the wheel off, but right now I need the suspension to be compressed so that I can get my shock absorber on, because the shock absorber is what actually limits, the suspension travel. So it's going to be a little awkward. I'm going to have to work around the wheel until I get the shock absorber on, and then go from there. All right, guys, I just realized that I don't really have enough space to get this thing started up underneath the car, so I'm going to jack it back up, get the shock started on the bottom, then I'll let the jack down, get the top bushings and nut here on the rod. All right, everything, just enough clearance now to get the shock in. Go ahead, feed it up, get this bolt started. Snap these things down. All right. Yeah, that's good for the bottom. Now we got to head up the top. Yeah, actually got to go ahead and do the other side, and then I can let the jack down. All right, so I'm going to reach in here and get the washer and the rubber bushing and the nut started on top. I won't be able to like fully seat them though until I let the jack down and let the suspension compress. Once I'm done. All right, shock absorbers are done. Jack the car back up, kind of get this wheel off. And then I'm going to get started on the brake calipers, which, you know, the brake calipers and then the brake lines are the last thing. So just got done. All right, so the calipers that came with my kit are a GM style metric caliper, which is pretty common for a lot of these kits. And then the mounting bracket that it came with is this big, heavy duty bracket. I think it's a forged bracket, pretty stout, so pretty happy with that. I'm gonna go ahead, get this bracket installed. All right, let's see here. It goes like this. Small bolt goes down here. Larger bolt goes at the top. And just a reminder here, guys, I would normally be putting Loctite on all this stuff and then torquing it to spec as well, but I'm going to be tearing all of this apart when I strip the car down for paint. All right, so let's see here. Looks like these pins have a threaded part on the shoulder here, so goes in there just like that. Well, I really do like that design because the threaded part is on the mounting bracket itself. So, you know, when parts wear out, you can just replace the mounting bracket and not your whole spindle. Tolerances on this hardware is a little bit snug until it's on some cheaper Chinese hardware, but a lot of times the clearances on some of that hardware doesn't fit quite like it should on your socket or your hex key. All right, there we go. Caliper installed. Just gotta go get my brake line and figure out where we're gonna route that brake line so that it doesn't, you know, pinch through any of this suspension as it cycles up and down. Here's the brake line kit that I got from Summit Racing by All Star Performance. Comes with AN, I believe, -4 brake lines, and then it comes with adapters. So this adapter, along with the banjo bolt that's in here, goes to the metric GM caliper, and then it has an AN fitting on this end. And then the other end, they send a bulkhead fitting for mounting in the inner fender or comes with a weld-on bracket right here. So yeah, the AN fitting, bulkhead fitting, and then you can just run your standard double flare, 3/16 brake line into the back of that. So I'm not really sure if I'm going to use these weld-on fittings or if I'm just going to drill a hole in the side of my inner fender, but just going to have to see, how the brake line lays out. All right, so here's the fittings and everything that it comes with. Banjo bolt, washer, fitting, washer, and then it's supposed to thread into the bottom of the caliper right here, and then this fitting faces away from me, so I'm not quite sure how the routing of the hose is going to go yet. Alright, so the hose is right here. It's going to have to come in at this direction like this. See if I can get it started. Alright, so I got the hose started. It's on the fitting. Seems kind of odd that they would have the fitting facing forward like that. Seems like the hose is going to have to run forward through, kind of through towards the front like that. Alright guys, so here's a good view of the front of the suspension, and you can see my brake hose right here running forward. Just trying to come up with a brake hose routing right now. A lot of OEM brake hose routings bring their hoses up towards the ball joint and then either along the front or back of the upper control arm. If I did that, I would have to come up with some sort of a mount to clamp it down. The good thing about doing that is that you route it through the pivot points and you have very little hose pulling or movement when the suspension or steering cycles. But I also did some looking online as well as the Heights website, and it seems like most people with this type of a setup end up just routing the hose straight out the front and then curving back around in front of the spring, something like this. Let me get my hand out of the way. So something like this. And so I think this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to end up somewhere in this location like this. So I'm going to get my welder out, mark this out, and then get this bracket tacked in place. Probably not going to fully weld the bracket right now just because it's in kind of an awkward position. Probably end up fully welding that out at some point in time later, but I'll get some good solid tacks on there. Alright guys, here's just a quick view of everything buttoned up. Got my brackets welded out on both sides, hoses, everything's installed, tightened up. Pretty happy with the way all that turned out, and I can't believe that it's finally done. Alright guys, well this is going to wrap up the Mustang II suspension install in this Falcon. I'm really pleased with the way everything turned out. It took a little while. I don't get to work on this every day, but I enjoyed the process. If you have any questions, or maybe you want to see some pictures of something closer up, feel free to drop some comments below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And I appreciate you watching. And also I'd appreciate if you like the video. That helps me out, helps out the channel. And also consider subscribing. Not only will it help out my channel, but it'll also make you aware of whenever I post more content. And I do have a lot more content coming. I'm nowhere near being done with this car. So thank you, and I will see you next time.